Well, good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to Grumman Pilots YouTube channel. And today we're going to talk about flying in the remote areas of Canada and Alaska. This was a trip that John Maestre and I did back in 1999 to wind up in the beautiful fishing camp on Kodiak Island. But when you go to do something like that, first off, you want to make sure that you have all the information that you need. All your charts are there for both the trip there and the trip pack, any flight supplements you need, any additional information. Secondly, you're going to want to make sure that your airplane is in good mechanical condition. You don't want to be carrying a lot of spares around or breaking down in remote areas. Then you're going to want to make sure that you carry some food and some beverage to drink during the day trips, and that will also help out. And then in the remote areas, you're also going to have to carry your survival gear. We also recommend that you take a camera and a logbook and record all of this. It's easy enough to do. By the way, if you travel with a friend, pick somebody you're in really good terms with, and hopefully at the end of the trip you'll still be friends, so stay tuned. So back in August of 1999, John Maestre and I got in an airplane, 4525 Whiskey, and we started off from Brookville, Ohio. We did all our planning, and we did a bunch of test fittings of how much luggage could we put in the airplane, because we're going to a remote fishing camp, and they only get mail once a week from the fishing boat. So we were taking things like a couple of cases of wine, a bunch of cases of beer, other stuff that they can't get at the fishing camp easily. So that's what we were trying our practice loads on the airplane, and we did that till about 10:30 at night, and we finally had the airplane as much as we could stuff in it. And then we get up in the morning to go get the airplane and start taking off for Alaska, and we find out that one of the rollers on the hangar door is jammed. So John's got to climb up on the roof, and we've got to fix the hangar door, but that wasn't a problem. We got that resolved. We were a little late taking off, but off we were going to Duluth and get ready to go to Canada. And here's a picture of us on the ramp at Kodiak Island. So we did actually make it to Alaska that day, but we did have a fun day of flying. And our first day was 14 hours and 45 minutes of just flying time, not elapsed time. Now let's talk about all the stuff that we had to do to get ready for this trip. So as getting ready for the trip, the first thing we did was we got a logbook, because one of the reasons for logging all of this was because we were going to do this trip and we were going to keep notes on it, because down the road we were going to go and do it again, and we wanted to have notes of where to stop for fuel, where to get lodging, where to get fuel. We also kept records every time we called 1-800-CAN-PASS or weather briefings up in Canada, that we wrote them all down. So when we got a briefing for North Battleford, we wrote down everything they told us, so we have a record for us. And as we were flying along, we started noting all the birds that we saw. John and I both had studied ornithology in college, and so we were looking at all the species of birds we had found. And where my finger is right there, below that are all the birds that we saw starting in Canada. And then once we got up to Alaska, we started locating caribou, moose, this kind of whale, that kind of whale. So anyway, we kept a list of all the stuff that we saw while we were going about this trip. And you want to keep good records. Now, we also kept records of what we paid for fuel and what we did. And then for every day of the trip, we started out with a note, and then we just wrote little bullet items of what we did each day. And we're going to find out that just starting that on the first day was a big benefit for us, because we had a log of what had happened to us in the airplane, and this will concern the Brandon error with the GPS. But we also kept track of fuel stops, food stops, as well as mileage and some other information. We also had spent a lot of time researching all the information sources we needed to make sure we had all the proper charts and everything for both rural Alaska and rural Canada. Now, when you start doing that research, you're going to find out like this. That page right there on the left-hand side, that is all the contact information for Canada and Alaska that we had to find. That was to get charts and pamphlets and stuff that are not readily available on the web like they are today. Again, this is 1999, folks. And then we had a list of all the survival gear that we had to carry. Now, if we're going in remote Canada, that's what we had to carry. And what's highlighted there in bright yellow is no handguns. You have to bring a long rifle or a shotgun, but you're not allowed to bring a handgun at all. And then that's a list of all the items that you have to carry in the aircraft to fly over the remote areas of Canada. So we looked at all of that list, and then we compared it to the list of what was recommended. Now, that little list right there at the very top, that's what you have to carry in Alaska in the summer. On the bottom is in the winter, and then on the other page, those are just columns of recommended items that you should carry in your airplane for remote areas. And as we were looking at that, you see, that's going to determine what our route of flight's going to be. Are we going to fly the coastal route, and we're going to make that jump from Washington State all the way to Ketchikan Island, Alaska, and that way we never have to land in Canada and we don't have to take all the Canadian survival gear. But then we're stuck with the weather on the coast. So what we decided to do was, how much of this can we actually fit in the airplane? And by the way, if you would go and fill that entire recommended list of survival gear and put it in the airplane, there wouldn't be room for the passengers to go on the flight. So again, we found that because of that we were going to go the non-coastal route. We were going to go cross-country across Canada, and therefore we began our shopping. The one item that we did not have in our list of survival gear that we documented for Canada was we could not find a gill net of less than 2 inches in diameter. A matter of fact, we couldn't find any gill net that we could buy in the United States to fulfill that, and we explained it to Canada. But anyway, you'll find that there's a lot of information. Now, let's go over some of the stuff that is required survival gear. So let's cover some of the summer Alaska survival gear that you're required to have. First, for each person, you must have food for them for 2 weeks. You must have an axe or a hatchet at least 20 inches in length. You must have a first aid kit. You must have a shotgun, rifle, and ammunition. And in Alaska, you can carry a pistol, but you cannot carry a handgun or a pistol in Canada. Keep that in mind. You have to have a small gill net or fishing tackle, 1 knife, 2 boxes of matches, 1 mosquito headset for each person aboard. You must have 1 pair of snowshoes if you're going to be traveling in snow greater than 12 inches. In summer, 1 sleeping bag, 1 wool blanket for each person over 4 years, 2 small signaling devices, and it can be colored smoke or it can be a flashing signal mirror. But that's what's required just for the summer in Alaska. Now let's take a look at, for flying over sparsely populated areas of Canada, what you have to carry for survival gear. Again, no handguns. You notice it's in bright yellow in our logbook. First off, you're going to need food. 10,000 calories per person per day, sealed. You're going to need cooking utensils. You're going to need matches and waterproof containers. Notice the plural there. Fishing equipment, including still bait and a gill net not over 2 inches in diameter, if you can find them. You're going to need mosquito nets and a good repellent for each person on board the aircraft. A signaling mirror. A portable compass, not the one in the aircraft. You're going to need an axe. The head must be at least 2.5 pounds and must be 28 inches in length minimum. You must have a flexible saw blade. You must have 30 feet of snare wire and instructions on how to use snares. A stove with fuel. A tent or engine wing cover in international orange for each person on board. 3 signal flares. A jackknife or a hunting knife, a conspicuousy panel for saying SOS, a survival manual. And now, if you're in winter, you're going to need a sleeping bag that's rated at below 7 degrees Celsius, 2 pairs of snowshoes for each person where the snow is greater than 12 inches, a spare axe handle, a honing stone or file for the axe, a flashlight, bulbs and spare batteries, a pack or a knapsack, firearms as discussed, an ice chisel, snow knife or a snow saw, and a snow shovel. Now, I'm not going to read you the list of all the recommended survival gear because, again, this was survival gear required in 1999. It's now 2021. I'm sure it's changed, and they've probably made some improvements. So do a current list of what you have to take now. Now, there's one more thing to talk about for the trip. Now, we kept a log of what we saw and did during the day, and here are all just a list of just the birds that we saw in the United States, and then we crossed over into Canada. So you will find that there are many things you have to do to amuse yourselves on a long trip like this. So based upon the survival gear for the coastal route and for the inland route, we decided on the coastal route because, on the inland route. That gave us the option we could come back on the coast if we wanted. And we weren't going to be jumping from Washington State all the way up to Ketchikan. And so therefore, and here's what it looks like on the VFR. We've been flying a lot of coastal stuff, but again, you don't have to stop in Canada. Therefore, you don't have to carry the Canadian thing. So what we decided to do was we were going to go through Winnipeg. Now, we had 3 GPSs on board, and they were all tied in through the multifunction display. John was an avionics guy, and we were supposed to be going to Winnipeg. We wound up going to Brandon. Now, I'm going to dig up some footage of that, but while I'm looking for that, let me tell you what happened and why we ran into a little bit of a snag and why good record keeping can help you out. Now, we were flying along fat, done, and happy after we left Duluth as we were on our way to Winnipeg, and we were writing down, stuff that we saw, taking pictures. We had the video camera rolling, and then we discovered that all of a sudden the map didn't match what we were seeing out of the window. So we started to investigate that, and we found out that we had lost one GPS, and then we had lost another GPS. And the only GPS that was up and running was our third GPS, and we had programmed it the night before for Brandon. We were looking at it as another route versus going to Winnipeg, and we had decided on Winnipeg because of their facilities. But anyway, we inadvertently wound up in Brandon. And what caught our attention to it was, one, that the terrain out the window did not look like what it was, and we also flew through a live fire area. We saw explosion off the pilot side wingtip out in the distance, and we knew that we were not where we were supposed to be, so we went to Brandon. Now, the nice thing about Canadian airspace is when we landed, they knew that we had violated some restricted airspace. They knew the color of the airplane. They knew the color of our hair, who wore glasses, who was wearing what color shirt. So we just fessed up and we told them about the GPS. We showed them our logbook where we had logged it, and we showed them the videotape in the camera where we had been trying to fix the problem while we were flying. And that was our get out of jail free card, folks, for Brandon. Now, that was the only first thing that happened flying in Canada that day. Now we're going to tell you what happened at our first fuel stop at North Battleford. So in Canada, they rely greatly on the Canadian Flight Supplement. They're also very big about how you enter the pattern to land at an airport. And now, if you're within 5 degrees of the runway heading, you can do a straight in. And that's exactly what we did at North Battleford. And when we landed on the ground, a CFI came out and gave us a rash of stuff about why we didn't do a circuit and go downwind and do base and announce everything. Well, we had announced that we were coming in. There was no other traffic, and it was a straight-in approach, which when he showed us the Canadian Flight Supplement, we pointed out to him. They obviously knew it was us because of what had happened down in Brandon and trying to get to Winnipeg. But anyway, you can do that. So even though this was an approach right here where we came in at an angle in Canada, you can do a straight in if you're within 5 degrees. So based upon that, when we got to Peace River, we decided we were going to find a CFI and get some local knowledge about rules and regs. So John and I had a lot to talk about, and our little tiger was watching our way as we were flying across Canada. And again, once we left North Battleford, we had to reposition to Hanlon to get fuel because North Battleford was out. So once we repositioned the grueling 8 miles to the other airfield, we picked up the fuel for the long flight that we now had into Peace River, and it was a long day. Now, this is right as we're coming into Peace River at sunset, and by the way, folks, it's 11 o'clock at night. But, it is midsummer in the higher latitudes. But we made it all the way to Peace River. And when we got there, once we got the airplane parked and all, John and I decided that we walked over and we were able to find a used copy of the Canadian Flight Supplement, which we paid full price for, but we had a copy of it as reference. And then we also had an instructor that was giving us some pointers, and then he recommended a hotel, which we went to, and then right across the street from the hotel was an Italian restaurant. So we went over there for dinner, and we also called the flight instructor over, and we bought him a couple of beers and let him explain to us what were the rules and regs for flying in Canada that we might not read in the book. And he was the one that let us know that you had to be on a flight plan, or that a responsible person had to have knowledge of your flight, and if you were overdue and they were not contacted, they would let the authorities know. So that's exactly what we did. We invoked that rule several times, and we got asked by Canadian officials, like, why did we not have a flight plan? And we explained that we had a responsible person on duty for that task. So anyway, it was a long, full day of flying, almost 15 hours of flight time. That wasn't including stopping for fuel, hunting for food, something to drink, and everything like that. But anyway, pulling into Peace River at the end of the day was nice. John walked across the ramp to go try to find a flight instructor to get some local information. And then again, we went to the hotel. We bought the guy some beer. He gave us a lot of useful information and told us how to navigate the system a little bit better so that we wouldn't be showing up as the silly Americans wherever we went. So, ladies and gentlemen, I recommend that when you're flying in remote areas, you talk to the local pilots. That was how we found shortcuts up in Alaska to knock 80 miles off. You'll get some crazy instructions like that, and I'm sure I will pull that video up. And here's where we went for beers at night. But again, take advantage of the local information if it is available. So the next morning we got a fairly late start, but off we went, and we were on our way to Skagway via Whitehorse, and that's where we would go through the pass and all of the Yukon Pass. And we were stopping there to see Bill Heckle. He and his brother run a couple of shops in Skagway, Alaska, and it was a good overnight. We could see the area, and then on day 3 we left Skagway and did the last couple of 100 miles on into Kodiak Island, and also a lot of coastal sightseeing. So again, folks, you can do this, and it is a lot of fun. Now let's talk about some of the stuff that we saw on our trip, and this is where the video is going to get really interesting. And by the way, let me point out that Canadian officials and U.S. Customs officials are serious about the survival gear that you have to have in your airplane. And there were a couple of times where we had to pull it out and we had to show it to prove that we had it. And by the way, once again, the Canadians are very big about no handguns. You can do that in Alaska, but you cannot do that in Canada. And let me add one more thing, that we decided that we were going to shoot video on this trip, and we went out the night before we left and bought a video camera, 2 spare batteries, a box of tapes, and the only thing that I regret with it we didn't have time to do was to wire the microphone from the intercom into the camera. But we shot 8 hours of video while we were flying and 4 hours when we were on the ground. So we had quite a bit, and we saw quite a few things, and we tried to document those from the air, and that's what's going to be up and coming for you. So stay tuned for all of that. If you do make this trip, take a video camera and take video. Now you're going to see a lot. We saw a lot of Russian-style churches after we crossed into Canada. As we came into remote airports, we were looking for fuel, and sometimes it's a small community with a hard surface runway, and believe it or not, they have aviation fuel. So you're going to get to see a lot of different types of things. Here we are in the coastal plains, but in the next few hours we're going to be into the mountains and the rivers and the marshes, and we're going to see more beaver dams than you can ever imagine up in northern Canada. I mean, they just make a ton of ponds for things to play in, and we saw a lot of wildlife. But again, here we are at Cooking Lake, and we're pulling up to the gas pump, and we're going to fill up with fuel, and from there we're going to take off and continue our day. We flew over a lot of forest. Matter of fact, we started out at 11,000 feet, and we looked around and we couldn't see anywhere to land within sight. And we said, if the engine stops right now, in about 12 minutes, we're going to be in the trees. So we came down and flew above the trees because we figured we were going to land in them anyway. You're going to see a lot of rivers and stream beds. You're going to see rock where they rode away on those things. There's going to be a lot that is going to be visible from the air. The one thing that we were truly disappointed in when we did finally get to the coast was that when they clear cut the forest, they clear cut back a half a mile from the coast so that you can't see the clear cutting from the cruise ships, but it is evident from the air when you're flying along. So there's a lot of breathtaking and beautiful scenery to fly. Again, just make sure your airplane's in good mechanical shape, that you're traveling with somebody you really like and somebody knows where you are. So in case you deviate shortly from your flight plan, make sure that you let them know. You're going to see things like this where the streams run against the side and people are down there and they're actually mining the dirt looking for gold and silver. There were a lot of places that we flew over, and like right here, this is a silver area that we were just flying over. We went there just because we wanted to see it. It was on the chart. And then, of course, you can't fly without flying the Alaska Highway. I mean, you come up against it a lot, and it is a wonderful highway, and it's a wonderful long runway should you ever need it. Just obey the rules of flying near villages and cars and other items. And then you're going to see a lot of granite mountains, and they're going to have snow on them. Some are not going to have snow. And then when we get up closer to Alaska, we're going to be flying with glaciers. We're going to have glacier moraines. We're going to have calving glaciers. There's going to be a lot to see along the coast with the mountains up there with all the snow and all that has been collected. So enjoy this. Now we're leaving the engine soundtrack on the background of these, and there's a reason for that. We flew this entire flight in a Grumman Tiger at 2,500 RPM, lean to 10 gallons an hour. And that's why the engine sound from clip to clip to clip is always the same, because we had just topped the engine overhaul and had done a bunch of the accessories. So the engine sound is very consistent through all of those. And again, we were cruising at 10 gallons an hour, and that gave us a 4-hour normal range, and we could stretch it to 4.5 hours if we actually had to, and go a little further if need be. But you're going to see a lot of fun stuff. And then here's Watson Lake. It's almost like landing on an aircraft carrier, because you're coming in over the lake. Yes, there is land on the right, but you're going to come around and there's a nice big runway there, and they have a lot of good fuel. They actually have 2 FBOs that sell fuel at Watson Lake, and we were able to negotiate between the 2 of them, let them underbid, and we took the low bidder. By the way, case in point, the people are there. If you see a green tennis ball on the ground near the fuel pump and you see what looks like a husky dog, you might want to check it out, because I picked up a green tennis ball and I was throwing it for what I thought was a husky pup. John walked up to me and go, why are you playing fetch with a wolf? And we looked over there, and he was right. Sure enough, it was a wolf pup hanging around the settlement. So be careful what you do when you're in these remote areas. But again, they are fun to fly into. Just be on the top of your game. Be nice to the locals. And again, ask them what they might be able to tell you to see when you take off, because they might say, if you take off and you turn over here 30 degrees, there's this old village and you can still see the remains. So there's a lot of stuff that you can see. And of course, there's always the Alaska Highway, and please don't upset the traffic on the highway. What's really interesting to see when you're flying the highway is there'll always be some camper going along at 25 miles an hour, being pulled by a truck going up a hill, and behind it'll be about 50 cars, and occasionally they do pull over and let people go by. But again, kind of hard to get lost when you're flying the Alaska Highway, and we did it for a while just to say that we did it, but we were more interested in getting where we were going and going cross country. And you're going to see lakes, you're going to see marshes, you're going to see coastal. There is going to be a tremendous amount to see, and we were very fortunate. The weather, everywhere we went, it was like this, except for the few spots where we hit rain, and we did videotape it. But we were fairly lucky, because everywhere we went, people said, you got really lucky. The weather's really good here today. And we told them we were bringing it with us. So, ladies and gentlemen, there's a lot of very varied terrain to see, a lot of wildlife to see, and you'll have a good time. Now let's go find some more fun footage for you. Now when we finally did make it over to the coast, you can start to see the coastal weather coming in over the tops of the mountains. So you can't always see the tops, and so you're flying around the bottoms of the mountains, sometimes staying under the overcast. The rules for VFR flying in Alaska are a lot different than they are in the continental U.S., But again, you might want to be instrument rated and know your airplane really well and keep both sets of eyes out looking for things. So we did fly through some low clouds and we flew through some rain. I don't want you to think that all we saw was beautiful sunshine the entire time that we were there. So be expecting it, and you never know when you're going to come across find it, and but it can make for some interesting navigation. Now in Alaska, you'll get people on the radio give you shortcuts. Like we were flying to Haines on the way back, and we were up on the Copper River, and someone said, oh, if you want to knock about an hour of your flight off, fly up the Copper River until you come to the second straight valley on your right. Fly up that straight valley till you come to a glacier. Go to the top of the glacier, make a hard left turn, fly down the glacier, and you'll be in Haines. And we did that, and we knocked 80 miles off of our trip. Not to mention we saw some stunning scenery along that route. And occasionally we would get the whole airplane washed, which if we were flying low over forest, we'd pick up a few bugs, and this is one way to get rid of it. And this kind of gives you an idea of some of the marginal visibility. I mean, you can see that there are mountains in the distance, and you don't want to go up into the clouds because the mountaintops are up in there also. But as long as we had a mile visibility, we knew we had 30 seconds that we could turn around and come back. Maneuvering like this, we were usually down at 120 to 125 knots to give us some leeway if we saw something that we didn't like. So, ladies and gentlemen, flying in remote areas can be wonderful. It just takes a little bit of preparation. Once you do it, you will be a fan for life. It's a great thing to do. So we hope you found all this useful and informative. Thanks for watching, and have a great day flying your Grumman.